Welcome back to another edition of the MMA Pick'ems podcast, where we will be breaking down UFC Fight Night Rodriguez versus Waterson, supposedly. I mean, the wheels have completely fallen off of this card. The original main event, Dillashaw versus Sandhagen, is off, and looks like the co-main event is off as well. So I'm not really sure on the status of this card, what the deal is with it. Nothing seems to be confirmed or is official yet. Even on the UFC website, they only have one fight on there that is booked. I mean, for fuck's sake, I don't even have a proper thumbnail for this episode. Anyways, I'm just basing these fights off of what's listed on Tapology here. And, here's the hoping that we do still get a card because, even though the main event is a little lackluster, there still are some other good fights on this card as well. And I think some good opportunities to make some money, too. Before we go any further, we do have to recap the previous event like always. So I guess we'll start with the props, and I guess we'll start with the ones that didn't really come all that close to hitting. And the first one was Kolaris by submission. Took a small stab on that because of Sanders' questionable cardio and has a habit of choking away wins. And, while I wasn't really all that high on Kolaris, this was a bit of a fade on Sanders, more so just banking on him choking than really my faith in Kolaris overall. So overall, that was just a really small stab on that prop. And then Kai Kamaka by KO TKO. I know Kamaka never really had any, well, he doesn't have any, knockout wins or anything on his record, but Brown has always had a really suspect chin. The guy periodically gets, knocked down and dropped and rocked. So I just took a small stab there. I felt that if Kamaka was able to sit him down, he might be able to, swarm TJ Brown and maybe get a TKO stoppage, by landing a flurry or something. He did, get a knockdown, I believe, but wasn't able to really capitalize on it. And I guess Kamaka just doesn't really have much, killer instinct or finishing instinct. And I guess it doesn't really help that he's got cardio issues, so he isn't really able to go all in after knocking him down. So that's that. And then I also had half a unit on Stamann by decision. In hindsight, obviously, not a great bet. But I just felt that if Stamann was able to keep it standing, he might be able to keep it close enough on the feet to steal a decision. And with how shitty the judging was last night, I felt that maybe he could have stolen something. But obviously, the pressure and the pace of Merab was a bit too much for him. But, at plus 385 odds at half a unit, I'm not too upset with that bet there. And the other ones, this is where it gets a little interesting. So I took Kudalaba by decision, and I know I said that Kudalaba is pretty much, first round knockout or bust, and I don't think that's not true, but I felt that, in hindsight, the breakdown was a little bit sloppy, a little bit lazy, because, that's just the narrative with him. But, Kudalaba does have, a wrestling base, and the reason that I took a small stab on this prop, I just felt that with, Jacoby's, weak wrestling game and weak, defensive grappling, I felt that Kudalaba could have had, some success going to his wrestling. Obviously, the cardio issues were still there. He did have some success with the wrestling, but wasn't able to carry that through to, the second and third round. And the fight did end up playing pretty close. It did go to a draw, but, with, at the odds that I got at plus 750, and it came that close, I'm not too upset with this pick here. And for the final prop, I did take Reyes by knockout. And, obviously the safe play would have just been to, lay the chalk on fight ends in knockout. But I wanted to take a stab on something with a good big plus number next to it. And I felt that with the way Prochazka kind of left his chin out there, how hittable he is, that Reyes would find the mark. And, at one point, it looked like he did rock him, actually hurt Prochazka pretty badly, but the ability for Prochazka to recover and get on that single was pretty crazy. I mean, he was able to recover pretty quickly and eventually get the knockout there. So, man, going forward, I don't know what to do with Prochazka. I mean, with the way he fights, he's just asking to get knocked out, but do I continue to keep fading him knowing he's got crazy good recoverability? And, he's a pretty dangerous striker in his own right, so yeah, I don't know. I guess it'll just come down to the number going forward. And that'll do it for the props. And then I also had a parlay, Loma Lukbunmi and Sean Strickland. I mean, not much to recap here. Both guys kind of just coasted. It was a pretty pretty much one-way traffic for the most part. Sam Hughes did put up a bit more of a fight than I expected, but the skill difference was just way too big, even though Hughes did have the size advantage. And then obviously I took Chikadze over Swanson. Had a pretty big bet on him, and the price wasn't that great in hindsight. I took him at, I think, around like minus 200, even though it seemed like a lot of money was coming back on Swanson. And I was sweating it a little bit throughout the week. It looked like a lot of the sharps were on Swanson, but I think the age and the athleticism decline was just a bit too much for Cub at this point. But yeah, was able to cash that Chikadze bet pretty easily. So yeah, that'll do it for the recap, and let's dive right into this card. And in the first matchup of the night, or at least I think in the first matchup of the night, according to Tapology, we have Mike Trizano versus Ľudovít Klein. And Klein's going to be the minus 235 favorite. Comeback on Trizano is plus 200. And let's start with Trizano here. So he's got a pretty good kicking game, good low and body kick. As far as striking goes, he is a little low output as he's looking to counter a lot of the time. What I've noticed he likes to do is he likes to dip his head out of the way and then throw the counter. And overall he does rely on his head movement a lot to avoid shots. Overall though, I'm just not very impressed with the striking game. He doesn't seem to have much power and the volume isn't really there. So I feel like it's going to start catching up with him. I mean, the guy's had a couple split decision wins already, in the UFC. So, with this fighting style, I don't really, not a big fan of his fighting style overall. And as far as his grappling goes, he does seem to be a little weak, in the defensive grappling. However, he did go up against pretty solid grapplers in Pena and Dawson who were able to, control him for extended periods on the ground. And something to consider with Trizano also is he is going to be coming off a pretty long layoff, and I believe he was injured during this time as well. So definitely something to take into consideration here. And his opponent, Ľudovít Klein, so right off the bat, I mean, this guy's got really heavy leg kicks, whether it's the front kick, body kick, or the head kick. The guy just puts so much into it, and he's got really good timing on that head kick, and that'll definitely be a talking point in this matchup, especially with how Trizano dips his head. I think that the head kick knockout is very live. But as far as his striking game goes, it's pretty decent. I mean, he does load up quite a bit on a lot of his punches, but I think it's more so to just kind of get his kicking game set up. And, something I did notice is he does stand a little heavy on his lead leg, which Trizano will likely be able to take advantage of. As far as his defensive grappling goes, though, I've seen him taken down and held up against the cage for extended periods, but he does seem to be decent at working his way back to his feet and getting back into space. But as far as the matchup goes, I am going to favor Klein here. I think with the way Trizano dips his head off, to the side to avoid punches, I think that leaves him open to getting head kicked. And with, how sharp Klein's head kicks are, I think that there's a good chance that he is able to land pretty clean on Trizano here. And even if Klein isn't able to get that head kick knockout, I think he's got a style that's more conducive to just winning minutes on the scorecards, just because I think he's going to be the one that's hitting a bit harder. And his volume, I don't think it'll be much higher than Trizano's. I think, as far as output, I think they'll both be, pretty similar. But I see Klein landing the much heavier shots, and I think he will be the one pressuring. Again, like I said before, I'm just not a big fan of Trizano's style. He's, again, not very high output, not a ton of power either. So he's kind of reliant on, just throwing counters. And if you're not knocking someone out and you're not throwing that much volume, I just don't see him doing too well on the scorecards. And the other consideration is the long layoff for Trizano. I mean, 2 years, he's going to have a little bit of rust, in my opinion. And going in there with, a 2-year-long layoff, he might need that first round to get into rhythm. And I'm not even convinced the fight will get out of the first round. I think that the head kick KO is very live here. But assuming Klein isn't able to get the knockout early, I think that Trizano will have to take that first round to maybe shake off some of the cobwebs, get into rhythm a little bit. But by then, you've already given up a round. So I favor Klein to at least win one more round, even if he isn't able to get the knockout. So I'm taking Klein here. I think he gets it done by knockout, but I wouldn't be surprised if he just wins the decision here. So the pick here is Klein. I don't know if I want to play the money line just yet. It seems a little steep at minus 235 at this point. And, even though Trizano is coming off of a pretty long layoff. We don't really know if he's, made some big improvements to his game. Maybe he'll come in here and grapple and just grind out a decision. So right now it is a little risky, but if I were to play a prop here, it would be Klein by knockout, maybe first round knockout, but I will have to wait for the props to come out before, pulling the trigger on the knockout prop. Tafon Nchukwi versus Jun-Young Park, and Nchukwi is going to be the minus 170 favorite. Comeback on Park is plus 145. And let's start with Nchukwi here. So from what I've seen so far, this guy, he likes to pressure his opponents, pretty aggressive with his pressure actually, likes to back them down against the cage and look to just tee off on him. Defensively, does keep a pretty good tight high guard, and he's got pretty good body shots as well, good left hook, and his output seems pretty solid. It's not like super crazy or anything, but he does seem to pack a bit of a punch. But he's consistently working in there. And what I really do like about him, though, is he seems to stay pretty composed. He doesn't get very wild with his shots at all. He's very good at, keeping his combinations tight and, just staying really composed and not overextending. We did see him in his most recent fight against Pickett where, he was pretty outsized in terms of like height and reach, and was still able to close the distance on him and really just neutralize a lot of the length of Pickett. He is pretty hard to take down as well. He's, a big, strong guy, and he hasn't really fought any wrestlers so far, but from what I've seen so far, his takedown defense does seem to check out. And taking a look at his opponent, Park, so he's pretty light on his feet. He's a little undersized for the division, in my opinion, but I guess he does have the speed advantage in most of the matchups, I suppose. So, he's pretty light on his feet, has a good jab, pretty decent combination striking as well, and does have a decent, low and body kick that he goes to. Also, his counterpunching is pretty solid as well. And, just overall, I'd say he's a pretty well-rounded fighter as well. He does like to wrestle in a lot of his fights. We've seen him do that in his two most recent fights against, Marc-Andre Barriault and John Phillips. Although these guys, they're not really high level fighters at all, and their takedown defense is really spotty. Especially John Phillips, who was basically the stepping stone for the Chimaev hype train. He got absolutely demolished in that fight, and then Park just came in there, did the exact same thing, except no one really gave a shit about that performance. And I remember I was actually pretty upset about that because I'd actually played Park in DraftKings, and apparently none of the shots he landed were counted as significant strikes, even though, in terms of like his statistics, I think he landed like over 200 strikes on Park or on Phillips. But in any case, Park, he is a pretty well-rounded guy, can take it to the ground, and his stand-up is decent as well. But as far as this matchup goes, though, I'm not sure if Park is going to be able to have much wrestling success against Nchukwi. For one, Nchukwi is going to be a very big guy, very strong. His takedown defense is solid. So I just see Park having a really hard time getting the fight to the ground and honestly keeping Nchukwi on the ground. So I think the fight will largely play out on the feet, and if that is the case, I do favor Nchukwi a bit more. I just think that his skill set is going to translate much better into this fight. I think that Nchukwi is going to be able to pressure Park. He's going to be able to back him down, and Park, he's going to have to close the distance to be able to land those strikes on Nchukwi. And when that happens, I think that Nchukwi will definitely be able to touch up Park. And when it comes down to it, I think that Nchukwi is going to be much more proficient at winning minutes, especially since I think he's going to be the one that's pressuring. I think he'll be landing the heavier shots in a lot of the exchanges, and I think that scores really well with the judges. If you're able to control the octagon and also be landing the more impactful shots. So I do favor Nchukwi in that regard. The only way I see Park really winning this is if he's able to stay on the outside, avoid a lot of the shots of Nchukwi, and just look to counter him as he's coming in. Maybe just continue to, circle out, maintain distance, and just look to be able to land some of his counters without taking too much damage, as I think he's probably going to be the quicker guy in there, but I really don't think he'll have that big of a skill or speed advantage on Nchukwi that he's going to be able to consistently counter him without taking too much damage. And, he might be able to get his wrestling game going a little bit, but again, I really don't see him having much success there. So I just see a very limited path to victory for Park here. I think more than likely Nchukwi is able to, again, just pressure him, back him down, and just land the more impactful shots over the course of 15 minutes. As far as betting tips go, I'm not sure if I want to lay minus 170 on Nchukwi just yet. He's still pretty unproven, and Park will likely be the most skilled opponent he's fought so far. That said, though, I don't have too many bets on this card, and, if I were to make a bet, I might do Nchukwi by decision. Park seems to be pretty durable so far, and, Nchukwi, I don't think he's, super explosive, powerful or anything. He does seem to have some pop in his shots, but he's not someone that, is going to look to take your head off, and, he's fought relatively low-level guys, so, he has a ton of knockouts in the regional scene. But I think, once you get to the UFC with, against higher level opponents who are a bit more defensively sound, he's not going to be getting that many knockouts. So I like Nchukwi by decision, but as it stands right now, there is some money coming in on Park. So honestly, if I could get minus 150 on Nchukwi, I might just play him straight and then maybe sprinkle a little bit on that decision prop. But the pick here is going to be Nchukwi, and depending on where the line goes, I might take a small shot on Nchukwi. Christian Aguilera versus Carlston Harris, and I'm going to take the over for the amount of times Christina Aguilera gets mentioned in this matchup. Anyways, Christian Aguilera, so actually let's take a look at the odds first. Christian Aguilera, it's near a pick'em. He's going to be minus 105, and Harris can be had for minus 115. And let's take a look at Aguilera first. So he's already got 2 fights in the UFC. But, I feel like we haven't really seen too much from him in those 2 fights, because in his debut against Ivy, he basically was able to starch Ivy early in that first round. Didn't really get to see his game too much. And then in his second fight against Sean Brady, again, another fight where he pretty much got dominated for, a round and a half before finally getting submitted. So, I had to kind of dig through some of his regional tape to see what he, brought to the table here. So, Aguilera, he's a little wild on the feet, does seem to have, quite a bit of power. And, on the regional scene, he's able to hurt guys pretty frequently, But, I think his strength really lies in his wrestling. He's got decent takedowns, got a good blast double, decent top pressure, but, his top game isn't really that good. His top control is a little sloppy. I've seen him swept on multiple occasions, and in certain fights I've seen him he's been backpacked before too. So his defensive grappling isn't that great. So overall, I don't rate him too highly. I think he's a fighter who's kind of well rounded in the sense that he's got decent striking and decent wrestling, but doesn't really seem to excel anywhere and has flaws defensively in regards to the grappling and the striking. I'm not sure how much of a future he has with the UFC. I think he's kind of benefited from, the COVID era where the UFC is just kind of looking to get cards filled. But in any case, he's going to be going up against Carlston Harris, who, if I'm being honest, I wasn't able to find too much tape on. And the tape that I did find was really, really old tape. So, this guy, he's going to look to wrestle with you. On the feet, he's got a decent jab in 1-2. He's not too bad, and does look like he's got a bit of power as well, but he seems way more comfortable on the ground. And a lot of the fights, I just see him look to, he's striking usually to just close the distance, get his hands on his opponents, work that single leg, and really just look to either hold opponents up against the cage or just take him down and kind of just grind on them for, however long he needs to. He does have a number of submissions on his record. I haven't really seen those fights, but I'm going to assume that he does have a decent submission game. I don't know what level he's at, but it does look like he is able to, work the submissions in a number of those fights. But on the feet and on the ground, I do favor Harris a little bit more. And this is a pretty low-level fight in my opinion, but as far as the pick goes, I'm going to side with Harris here. And I've actually already put 1.25 units on him. I think that even though this is a pretty low-level fight, I favor Harris to be able to implement his game plan a lot. The one thing I did notice in all of Harris's fights is he's going to look to take the fight to the ground. He's really consistent in that regard. And that's why I favor him at the end of the day. With these low level fighters, I think the one that's able to implement their game plan the best is going to have the most success. And seeing Aguilera's defensive grappling deficiencies, I think that Harris is going to have a decent, a good enough shot to take Aguilera down, hold him down, either ground out a decision or even get the submission here. So I'd favor Harris quite a bit more. I think this, he should be lined at maybe like minus 150 or so. But again, Harris is making his UFC debut, and like it or not, Aguilera does have 2 UFC fights already, so he does have a bit more UFC cage time, although, those fights were pretty damn short. So, that being said, I think it should count for something. And, Harris, not a ton of tape on him, and has been beating up, regional guys. Seems to have decent records. So, I don't quite know how to make of that, but I think that Harris should be able to get it done here. I think that, if he is able to get his wrestling going, I think he's got a much better chance of winning this. And on the feet, I do favor him a little bit more as well. It seems to have slightly more crisp striking, whereas with Aguilera, he's a little wild. Both guys seem to have power too, so it might be a kind of even on the feet, but I do favor Harris a bit more on the ground. So I'm picking Harris here, and I do have 1.25 units bet on him. Ryan Benoit versus Zarrukh Adashev, and Benoit's going to be the minus 155 favorite. Comeback on Adashev is plus 135. And start with Adashev first. So Adashev, he's likes to blitz in, throws those really wild hooks, and he loads up on a lot of his shots. He goes to the well with a lot of the same shots and gets a little predictable, with the way he closes the distance. And he's got decent counter punching. The timing on it, could be a little better, but we did see him struggle quite a bit against solid strikers in Sud Mudarji and Tyson Nam. So I think a good technical striker will give him a lot of trouble. Outside of that, though, I haven't really seen much tape on Adashev. I mean, the guy's only has 6 fights. He's 3-3, so I'm a little surprised the UFC's kind of kept him around after getting knocked out twice already. I think in his fight against Dice, he did have a takedown that fight, but I don't think he was really aggressively pursuing it, and it was more or less a stand-up fight, if I remember correctly. Just a lot of back and forth, really heavy shots being exchanged, with him eventually catching Dice in that fight. And outside of that, though, again, I wasn't able to get too much tape on him. And his opponent, Benoit, so one thing I can say about him is he's pretty tough. He's never been knocked out, but he has been rocked on multiple occasions. With that being said, his offensive striking is decent. He hits pretty hard, but overall has pretty low output and, tends to fight in bursts where, kind of look for openings and throw like a maybe 2, 3, 4 punch combo, and every one of those punches he's going to load up on and packs quite a bit of power in each one of those shots. But outside of that, he'll have large moments of inactivity and really just look to swing hard in certain bursts. And he is a little flat-footed. I've seen him just kind of struggle with leg kicks a bit, and his fight IQ is a little bit questionable. There was a fight where, it was his fight against Elliott where he was having a bit of success on the feet, and I think was hurting Elliott in some of the exchanges, but decided to shoot a takedown against Elliott where, Elliott had a pretty clear advantage on the ground, and, Benoit's ground game is actually pretty weak, but he still decided to take him down there, and I think that kind of gave away the fight. It was a pretty close fight, and if it would have stayed standing, I think he definitely could have won the decision. But Elliott being able to, hold him onto the ground, or actually Elliott was able to reverse him. He locked in the guillotine and then ended up reversing him on the ground, and actually accumulated a good amount of control time. I think that kind of lost him the fight there. So fight IQ is a little bit questionable there. But as far as this matchup goes, I'm going to favor Benoit a little bit more just because, he's still got some UFC experience. He's lost to, some solid fighters in the UFC, but, his wins aren't really that impressive overall. That said, though, he does have, solid UFC experience, whereas Adashev, he's only got 6 fights and only 2 fights in the UFC, both of them, losses by knockout. Or, hold on. No, he actually only won by knockout. He lost to Sud Mudarji by decision, but he did get hurt a number of times in that fight. I think Mudarji had him I think he knocked him down at least once and had him rocked on a couple other occasions. So he got thoroughly beaten both outings. But yeah, as far as the pick goes, I am going to side with Benoit here. Aside from the UFC experience, I think stylistically it might be a good matchup for him. Especially with the way Adashev bursts in, I think that Benoit will have plenty of openings to land a clean shot on Adashev. And at this point, I think Adashev might not have a great chin. He was hurt. He was knocked out by Nam and hurt on a number of occasions by Mudarji. And I think Benoit, while he's not as technical as those guys and he's not as sharp as those guys, he definitely has the power. And if this becomes like a brawly sort of fight, I definitely favor Benoit a little bit more in here. I think he's going to be the harder hitter. Adashev, he's primarily just looking to blitz in and land those hooks or even land that counter hook. I'm not sure if he's going to be the quicker guy, but for that reason, I do favor, Benoit a little more there. So yeah, I'm taking Benoit, but, not super confident because, if he isn't able to knock Adashev out, this could be a really close fight on the feet, especially with how, little volume Benoit throws with. He will be landing the heavier shots, so it could be a scenario where the refs give him, or the judges give him the decision just based off of landing the heavier shots. But who knows, though. He opened up as a pretty sizable favorite, I think upwards to like minus 200. And money has come in on Adashev, and I completely understand because if Benoit isn't getting the knockout, he's going to have a hard time, getting the decision win. So can't really hate anyone for taking Adashev, at like plus 170, plus 180. But where it stands right now, at plus 135 for Adashev, I don't see too much value on him. And I don't know if I'd bet Benoit at minus money either. This guy's usually a fade for me. So the picker is Benoit, very low confidence in terms of, bet wise. But I wouldn't be surprised if he caught Adashev, man. Adashev's pretty low level. But at the same time, Benoit's not really a high level striker or anything. So I think I've gone on a little too long with this breakdown. The pick here is Benoit, but there's no way I'm taking the money line on him at minus odds. I might take a look at the knockout prop, and if the odds are good, I might take a small shot there. Otherwise, I think I might just pass on this fight. Maurice Greene versus Marcos Rogério de Lima. And let's take a look at the odds real quick. De Lima is going to be the minus 160 favorite. Comeback on Greene is plus 140. And let's start with Greene. So I'm not high on this guy at all, if I'm being honest. So, as far as a heavyweight goes, he does move pretty well. He's got, he's a tall, lanky sort of fighter, but honestly, I kind of see him as being like a Stefan Struve type of guy where even though he does have all the physical tools to be a successful heavyweight, he's just not very good at using them. That being said, he does pump out the jab and the kick, occasionally, but he could be much more aggressive with it. But a lot of the time, he just ends up getting backed up and guys just start teeing off on him. And I guess the issue with Greene really at the end of the day is the fact that he's a really chinny heavyweight, and that's pretty much a death sentence at heavyweight. You can't fight at that weight class and not have a chin. He's been hurt in a number of fights, and he's got a number of knockouts on his record. So that's something that's definitely a concern going into this matchup. But I think it explains why he's not as aggressive as he'd like to be because, he doesn't want to take too many risks in there. He doesn't want to get caught. So a lot of the time he's just backing up and just playing defense most of the fight. And when that's happening, he's, not as aggressive as he should be, and he's not really a good fighter on his back foot. So a lot of the time, he's just getting backed up and teed up on. And as far as his ground game goes, it's pretty non-existent. This guy is pretty trash on the ground, if I'm being honest. I mean, if you've got decent BJJ and you can take him down, I think that there's a good chance you're getting the submission. Fortunately for him, though, I don't think De Lima has the jiu-jitsu chops to be submitting Greene, as De Lima has pretty awful grappling himself. But back to Greene, he just hasn't really had a quality win in, quite a while. His last win was against John Vellante, who was giving him some trouble on the feet, which is never a good look. John Vellante came in, or rather, the man that ate John Vellante came in way overweight and was still giving Greene some trouble on the feet. Before, he kind of just gassed out, and I don't even know what happened that fight. I guess he kind of choked himself out in that matchup, and what was honestly the weirdest choke. The guy might have gotten a heart attack or something in that fight. But before that, he had a win against Junior Albini where, yeah, he did get the knockout, but man, leading up to that point, it was a pretty hairy fight. Like, there was a few moments in that fight where he did have Albini hurt. I think at least on 3 or 4 separate occasions in that first round, he had Albini like rocked pretty badly, but wasn't able to get the finish just yet. And there was actually a moment in there where Albini was able to catch Greene coming in. And if Albini had even an ounce of athleticism, he probably could have caught Greene and gotten a pretty crazy comeback win. But fortunately for Greene, Albini's a fucking bum. And, he was able to finally land that clean shot on him to take him out after, teeing off on him for most of the first round. But yeah, I mean, even in the fights that Greene wins, it's not a very, very pretty sight. So, yeah, I'm not really high on Greene at all. It looks like money is coming in on him, which, I really don't see why. I guess people are kind of fading De Lima, who he doesn't really have much of a ground game either, but on the feet he is a little wild, and with that, let's just dive right into De Lima. So yeah, De Lima, he's got really wild striking on the feet. He's going to be giving up a ton of size in this matchup. He's going to be the much shorter, stockier guy, but I think he's going to pack quite a bit more power. So yeah, De Lima, he's got pretty heavy leg kicks, tends to get really wild in the pocket, will just wing those massive hooks, and again, like I said before, his defensive grappling is pretty poor. If you're able to get him down to the ground, you could probably control him there and maybe even get the submission on him. His ground game is, pretty non-existent as well. Like in his fight against Struve, where Struve didn't land a single shot on a De Lima at all that whole fight, and was able to eventually get the submission on him. Pretty crazy fight, honestly. But yeah, I do favor De Lima quite a bit more in this matchup. I have him winning this. I think he wins by knockout. I think that, on the feet, he should be able to chop at the legs of Maurice Greene, and I don't think De Lima will have any issue closing the distance on Greene and possibly landing one of those, wild hooks on Greene's non-existent chin. I mean, if Vellante was able to give issues to Greene on the feet, I think that De Lima won't have any trouble, getting in distance to land one of those hooks. So, yeah, I'm going to side with De Lima here. I don't know if I want to bet him. De Lima, he's not the highest of levels, but I think this is a favorable matchup for him. And it does look like money is starting to come in on Greene. If, again, another fight where if I can get maybe like minus 150 on De Lima, I'd be happy to bet him here. Greene is a pretty easy fade for me, in my opinion. And I think the De Lima by knockout prop is pretty live, too. I think with how heavy he hits and, how chinny Greene is, I definitely think that if he's able to catch him, he could definitely land a flurry on him and get him out of there. And I wouldn't be surprised if he drops Greene with leg kicks too. Greene is, he stands pretty heavy on that lead leg, and he's had a lot of trouble with those leg kicks as well because he's a really tall, skinny, lanky legs. So I think the legs are going to be there to be chopped all day. And I think over the course of 2-3 rounds, Greene's probably going to start hobbling on that leg. His mobility is going to start to be limited, and I think that's going to make him a little easier to get hit. So, yeah, I got De Lima here, and I think he gets it done by knockout. And moving right along, we have Phil Hawes versus Cal Daukaus, and Daukaus is going to be the minus 137 favorite. Comeback on Hawes is plus 117, and this line actually opened up pretty wide. I believe Daukaus was the minus 200 favorite coming in, and he's been bet all the way down to minus 137, and it does look like a bit more money is coming in on Hawes. So the line is getting it's closing up pretty quickly here. But let's take a look at Daukaus first. So I feel like Daukaus, he's a pretty well-rounded fighter in my opinion. On the feet, he's got pretty crisp boxing, pretty accurate, and does have pretty good combination striking too. I do have to say, though, he's not a particularly hard hitter or anything, but I do like his striking. I think he's a pretty crisp boxer. And then, as far as his grappling and clinch game goes, he's got a pretty solid clinch game. He's got good clinch elbows and knees, and, will attack the guillotine when, the opponents are shooting the takedown, which, I'm not a big fan of. It gives up a good position if you aren't able to get the sub. And Daukaus is someone who seems pretty content with, fighting off his back. So that's something to keep in mind of. And as far as his takedown defense goes, it's pretty solid in my opinion. He's a pretty tall guy, so it's hard to get him down cleanly, although again, he will attack the guillotine, which oftentimes will put him on his back. However, he does seem to have pretty slick BJJ, and his ground game overall is pretty solid. He was actually able to hold his own pretty well against Brendan Allen a couple fights back on the ground, and was actually able to start pouring it on in the third round as well in that fight. And that was a pretty high-paced grappling match in my opinion as well. But again, the big issue here is with Daukaus's tendency to fight off his back, whether it's, attacking a submission or just throwing elbows, off his back. While, he is throwing output and he is working in there, it's just not very good in terms of optics and, just winning on the judges' scorecards. That said, though, he will make opponents work on top, and, he will look to get sweeps and reversals. So, he's not just laying off his back, just, not doing anything. So it's good to know that at least he is staying active. And his opponent, Hawes, so on the feet, he's got really heavy hands, solid leg kicks, just very explosive striking overall, loads up quite a bit on his punches. However, if he isn't able to get you out of there with his boxing, then he'll likely look to get the fight to the ground where, that is where his strength really lies, in my opinion. He's got a good wrestling base. He's really strong, really explosive. And, usually will look to hold opponents up against the cage or just secure some control time and likely just grind it out on the cards. But the biggest issue, obviously, with Hawes is his cardio. And, going into that Imavov fight, everyone was harping on that cardio. They wanted to see how he looks. And, coming out of that fight, I think it was completely validated. The guy just looked completely gassed in the third round. He was starting to slow down, I'd say, after that first round where, he was starting to push Imavov up against the cage. He was resorting to, some foot stomps. And, fortunately for him, I think that Imavov also had pretty bad cardio as well. It wasn't able to fight off the takedowns too well and, get back to his feet. But yeah, Hawes just completely gassed into that third round. And I believe one of the judges even scored that a 10-8 round for Imavov. That said, though, I do have to commend Hawes for being able to get out at least two of those rounds, despite, his cardio just completely falling off a cliff. And that's how I kind of feel in this matchup too, where I think Hawes has a very good chance of winning that first round just, based off of his athleticism, his wrestling base. I think he likely will be able to get a hold of Daukaus, maybe, hold him, push him up against the cage or hold him onto the ground and, just win that first round just based off of control time. I think going into that second round is where things really start to get dicey. I think it'll really come down to how much Daukaus is, making Hawes work. And, if Daukaus is able to do enough in that second round to really push the pace and push his output, he could win that second round. And, going into that third round, I do favor Daukaus pretty heavily, as I expect Hawes to be pretty gassed at that point. I don't think he'll have much output. His punches are likely going to come out very slowly, and his shots are probably going to come very sloppily. And I don't know if he'll have, the strength to get another takedown going into that third round. So, yeah, it's really tough for me to have to pick a side here because, I think with the way Hawes fights, he's good to win that first round, but you can pretty much have him as a lock to lose that third round. So I guess it'll really just come down to that second round. Who you think will, come ahead in that second round will likely win the fight. So, good on anyone who was able to get Hawes at that, big plus number, since, I do feel that this is close to a pick'em fight. But, I do have to slightly lean towards Daukaus a bit. I think that he's going to be able to make Hawes work quite a bit more than Imavov. I think Imavov has got pretty suspect cardio as well, but I think Daukaus is, pretty good cardio in my opinion. I think he's going to make Hawes work a lot on the ground. I think he's going to, put up a really good fight in terms of, stuffing the takedowns and giving him a lot to think about on the feet. I think Daukaus, he's got better striking on the feet, so I think he could definitely touch up Hawes, as the fight goes on when it comes to the striking. And I actually favor the grappling of Daukaus quite a bit more. It's just that with the top pressure of Hawes and his, wrestling game, I think that he could very well just grind out a very hairy decision. But if I did have to make a pick here, I am going to go with Daukaus. I think that his cardio is good enough to make Hawes really work. I think that he's going to make Hawes work much harder than he did in that Imavov fight. And while I don't think that Daukaus is as dangerous as Imavov on the feet, I definitely think that he's got enough volume to overcome some of the control time that Hawes will accumulate. And, I actually think that Daukaus might be live for a third round submission, especially, if Hawes really starts to tire, if he gets really sloppy with his takedowns, I think that Daukaus could very well just lock in a submission. He might even be able to maybe hurt and rock him on the feet and just, get the club and sub as well. So I think Daukaus round 3 submission is live. But yeah, I might just be looking at the submission prop in general just because I don't think that Hawes has a really good, jiu-jitsu game. I think that Daukaus is the much better jiu-jitsu practitioner, and I think he is live for the submission here. So without rambling on too much here, I'm going to pick Daukaus, and I'm looking at the submission and round 3 submission props. And in the next fight, we have Gregor Gillespie versus Diego Ferreira, and I'll probably just be calling him CDF for the rest of this breakdown. But Gillespie is going to be the minus 180 favorite. Comeback on CDF is plus 155. And let's start with Gillespie first. So, he was initially scheduled to fight Brad Riddell, I believe, a month ago, but the fight ended up falling through. But as far as his, striking goes, he's got a decent jab, overhand, but, his striking overall just seems very rudimentary. I mean, the guy is a wrestler. He's got great timing on his single leg, and he's really good at lacing the legs together, kind of like Khabib, and he's got good top control. He's very aggressive with his transitions, and he's relentless with his takedown. So he's not just going to give up on that after that first takedown attempt, and he's really good at feinting the level change to kind of draw out the uppercut. And I want to say he does have decent cardio, but a lot of his fights kind of end early. He hasn't really gone to a decision in a minute now, and he's coming off a really long layoff, so that is a concern too. And aside from the layoff, he is getting a little up there in age. I mean, he's not like super old or anything, but he is getting close to that cutoff point for wrestlers, especially where the cardio and the athleticism really starts to dip. And I'm not sure if he's going to be able to sustain a heavy wrestling, game plan, over the course of 3 rounds. So that is a big concern here in this matchup for me. And, as far as CDF goes, his striking has improved quite a bit since he's joined the league here. So, he's pretty light on his feet. He's got pretty heavy hands, and, he's got really high level BJJ, although he's only got 1 submission in the UFC. But, I mean, he's kind of fallen in love with his hands a bit in recent fights. But again, as far as his grappling goes, he does have solid BJJ, and he's really good in scrambles, and he's just really hard to hold down. I mean, he was just in a 3-round fight against Dariush where it was a pretty grapple-heavy fight, and I feel that he held his own pretty well in that fight. That said, though, he was hurt a few times by Dariush, if I remember correctly. And, while Dariush didn't really dominate him on the ground or anything, it did prevent CDF from getting off too much of his offense. So going into this matchup, I think Gillespie is going to be a much more dominant wrestler than Dariush, obviously. But I'm not sure if Gillespie is going to be able to dominate CDF though. Like, yeah, Gillespie's got a ton of wrestling accolades. He's a very good wrestler in his own right. But if you kind of just look through his competition, I mean, he's not exactly been fighting the highest level opponents. I'd say maybe his best win was, Vince Pichel, back in 2018. And even then, that was like a 35-year-old Vince Pichel. And that said, you do also have to consider it's been like a bit over 2 years since we've seen a really dominant wrestling performance by Gillespie. So, yeah, I'm just not completely convinced he'll come in here and just put on a clinic on CDF. If anything, I think that CDF will make Gillespie really have to work to take him down and hold him down. And, as far as the fight standing goes, I think that CDF can give Gillespie a lot of trouble if, it is just a striking match. But as far as a pick goes, though, I will have to slightly lean towards Gillespie since, assuming he hasn't lost too much of a step, he should be able to just chain wrestle CDF and just accumulate enough control time to, win on the judges' scorecards. But, I'm not sure if he will be able to get CDF out of there. I think that if he does win, it'll be a really, back and forth kind of grindy sort of decision. And even then, I don't think it'll be really pretty because, again, I think that, CDF's, defensive grappling is really solid. And, if Gillespie doesn't come in here in great shape or, not as good of a shape as he used to be, and CDF is able to extend this into the later rounds, he might be able to potentially get a finish or, get a submission late in the fight if Gillespie just isn't in great form. But, obviously, I'm not going to completely bank on that happening. From what I've seen so far, Gillespie does seem to still be in pretty good shape. So assuming he's, even 80% of what he used to be, he should be able to, get the victory here. But, I don't know if I want to lay the minus, 180 on him. This is a good spot to really just kind of sit back and really see, where his game is at this point, where he is physically at this point. So as far as a pick goes, we'll side with Gillespie, but I think I'm going to pass on this from a betting perspective. And in the next matchup, we have Neal Magny versus Geoff Neal. Jesus, two Neals. Okay. So Geoff Neal's going to be the minus 185 favorite. Comeback on Magny is plus 160. And let's start with Geoff Neal first. So like his nickname would imply, this guy's got very heavy hands and very heavy kicks as well. He's got a good jab, good 1-2, pretty good counter punching also. I mean, he's got really good timing on that. And, as far as his kicks go, he digs really well to the body and has a pretty sneaky head kick. Although, I would like to see his kicking game a little more, as, he is a bit of a headhunter on the feet. His takedown defense seems solid as well. Digs the underhooks really well, but, he hasn't really fought a high-level grappler or really someone with a grapple-heavy game plan. I guess you can kind of count Bilal Muhammad, but, Muhammad's got wrestling in his arsenal, but he's not really like a dominant wrestler or anything. But, something you do have to consider with Neal is outside of, Bilal Muhammad and Wonderboy, he's fought primarily just, brawlers in the UFC. And I remember actually putting a pretty decent-sized bet on Wonderboy in that fight just because I felt that the technique and the style of Wonderboy is just going to be a bit too much for Neal. I also felt it was a pretty big step up in competition, going from fighting guys like, Nico Price and Mike Perry to someone like, Thompson, who is, extremely light on the feet, extremely technical, versus, low-level brawlers like, Mike Perry and Nico Price and Frank Camacho. And I definitely feel he was riding a bit of hype going into that fight. Getting all those knockouts in the UFC and, not to discount them or anything, but, once you take that step up in competition and you start going against fighters who are a little more technically and defensively sound, it's going to be much harder to find those knockouts. But yeah, taking a look at his opponent, Magny. So Magny, he's going to be, I think, the much taller, lankier, rangier guy in this matchup. He's got a good leg kick and, he does throw them naked, so definitely open for the counter. He does have a nice little front body kick that he throws. Overall, I'd say he's got a pretty solid kicking game. He's not going to really hurt you with those leg kicks, but, he's primarily just throwing those to maintain distance, keep his opponents, at bay. He's got a decent jab as well, but he's not someone who's got a ton of power. He's, kind of just like a point fighter. He's a bit of a decisionator, in my opinion. And outside of that, he also does seem to have, a decent grappling game as well. He will look to, hold opponents up against the cage or, just shoot opportunistic takedowns to get some control time and just win minutes. But yeah, overall, I mean, Magny doesn't really have the most exciting style, but, he plays it pretty safe in a lot of his fights. He'll look to usually stay at range, kind of pick out his opponents. And, if his opponents get into range, he'll maybe look to clinch up with them, tie up with them and, just use his size to hold them while in stall, just accumulate some control time. But yeah, as far as this matchup goes, I think it'll actually play out pretty close. I think the line is definitely a bit wide. I think it's going to be pretty close to a 50-50 fight, in my opinion. I think the length and the range management of Magny is going to give Geoff Neal some problems. However, I do have to say that Magny does have a pretty bad habit of getting backed up and does struggle a bit against, heavy pressure fighters. So, Magny is eventually going to have to stand his ground and make Neal have to respect him a little bit. Otherwise, you don't want Neal constantly just backing you up against the cage and just unloading on you. However, I feel that if Magny is able to maybe sit down on a couple of his shots and really land clean a few times on Neal, then he'll definitely make Neal a little more hesitant when entering the pocket. And I definitely see Magny looking to maybe clinch up with Neal and maybe kind of wear him out a little bit against the cage to kind of mitigate some of the power that Neal has. And honestly, I feel that Neal is a bit one-dimensional with his, style. He just really looks to back opponents down and headhunt primarily. So not saying he won't have any success, but I think he'll have a much harder time landing clean on Magny as opposed to guys like, Mike Perry, Nico Price, and Frank Camacho. Like, Magny is not gonna play that game with them. He's not gonna look to brawl with. Neal here. I think he'll try to fight like Wonderboy, but obviously, he's not at the same level of Wonderboy, but he's going to look to stay light on his feet, stay on the outside, and just maybe look to, keep Neal at bay, or look to touch him up as he's closing the distance, or maybe even clinch up with him. So as far as the pick goes, I'm going to go with the underdog Neal here. I think that he's got the skill. I think he's got the technique to make this a really close fight. Obviously, with the guy like Neal, who's got, massive power, he's always going to be in the fight, but if he isn't able to hurt Magny, I just think that Magny's going to be the one that's winning the minutes overall. So I'm going to side with Magny here. I've actually already put, 0.75 units on him at plus 160, and I likely will be placing maybe a quarter of a unit or half a unit on Magny by decision as well, because I really don't see Magny, if he were to win by, submission or a knockout or anything. I think that if he does win, it'll most likely be by a very, close, kind of grindy sort of decision win. So yeah, I'm going to go with Neal here, and I do have a small bet placed on him. Moving right along, we have Angela Hill versus Amanda Ribas, and Ribas is going to be the minus 170 favorite. Comeback on Hill is plus 145, and let's start with Hill here. So Hill, she's got pretty solid striking in my opinion, but I think she's kind of got that Kai Kamaka, Impa Kasanganai sort of vibe to her, where it looks like she's got quite a bit of power and quite a bit of zip in her shots, but isn't really a finisher. She's got a pretty decent kicking game as well, and does have pretty good counterpunching. So overall, on the feet, she's got pretty good volume striking, and her cardio definitely seems to check out over 3 rounds. Her takedown defense actually isn't too bad, but if you are able to get her to the ground, though, she does tend to struggle a bit off her back and struggles a bit getting back to her feet. But her opponent, Amanda Ribas, so Ribas, she's got pretty decent striking in my opinion. It's actually not that bad, although I would have to say her defensive striking isn't as good. She's a bit hittable, but she does have pretty good fundamental offensive striking. Pretty decent kicking game, but she is primarily a grappler, and overall she hasn't really fought any good strikers, and the one time that she did, she got knocked out. So I might be overrating her striking a little bit. That said, though, I think she is going to look to take the fight to the ground in this matchup, especially with how lackluster Hill's bottom game is. So I definitely feel that, Ribas will likely look to get the fight to the ground, but her wrestling actually isn't that great. It's not like she has a good single or blast double or anything. A lot of her takedowns that I see her use are just either a body lock takedown or just she'll go for that hip throw. But yeah, she's not a great wrestler or anything. However, if she is able to get you to the ground, she's got a pretty good guard pass, a pretty good top control. We'll throw the ground and pound, and obviously she is a black belt in BJJ. She's got very solid jiu-jitsu on the ground. So yeah, I feel that this is potentially a pretty close matchup in the sense that I think that if the fight is standing, I favor Hill quite a bit more. But if the fight does get taken to the ground, I favor Ribas there, quite a bit more as well. So I think whoever is able to, keep the fight in their realm will have the most success, obviously. But, if I had to make a pick here, I am going to go with Ribas. I think that if she goes with a grapple-heavy game plan, then I think she definitely will be able to get the fight to the ground, at which point I'd see Hill having a really hard time getting back to her feet. And, if she does, I think that Ribas will likely look to just, chain takedowns together and, stay close to her, because she is coming off a pretty nasty knockout, and I don't think that this is a fight where she's going to look to test her stand-up again. And I believe she did specifically call out Angela Hill in this matchup, which usually I'm not too big of a fan of, because I get the feeling that when you do that, you're kind of underestimating or overlooking your opponent a little bit. But I feel like in this matchup, her camp and her team probably feel that there are a lot of weaknesses that can be exploited in Hill's game that they feel like they can exploit. So I suspect that they will come in with a pretty grapple-heavy game plan. So yeah, I am going to side with Ribas here, but as far as a bet goes, I really don't think I want to lay the minus 170 on her, especially with, her potentially suspect chin, right? So she's been knocked out twice already, and getting knocked out by 2 fighters who aren't really knockout artists in the women's strawweight division is not a very good look in my opinion. So yeah, even though Hill isn't really, she doesn't have a lot of knockout potential or a lot of power, I think that if she is able to keep it standing, she might be live for the knockout. I feel that there is a pretty sizable skill gap in the striking for both fighters. But yeah, from a betting standpoint, I think that Hill is definitely the value side here. But, I don't think I'll be betting this fight. I just feel that the defensive grappling is too big of a liability for Hill. And the potential chin issues of Ribas is also a concern as well in this fight. So while I do think that Ribas should win, via, her grappling, if Hill is able to keep the fight standing long enough, she might just be able to do enough damage on the feet to win on the scorecards or potentially even get the knockout. So I'm going to side with Ribas being able to secure the takedowns and get the control time, possibly even get the submission, but I think this is a really close fight. I think the value is on Hill, though. So the pick here is Ribas, but no bet. And in the co-main event, at least according to Tapology here, this is the co-main event, we have Ben Rothwell versus Philipe Lins, and this is a pick'em fight, so you can have Ben Rothwell for -105 and -115 for Lins. And this was a fight that was booked earlier. It did get rescheduled, but yeah, taking a look at Rothwell first. He tends to want to pressure. He does throw in combinations, usually in bursts. He likes to keep his hand out to kind of maintain distance, hand fight a little bit, but is a bit flat-footed. He's got pretty heavy hands, but I feel like he does his best work in the clinch. A lot of his offense comes from just tying up with opponents against the cage, just look to dirty box with them, maybe throw a few body shots in there. He's just got a very grindy sort of style. He had a very sloppy win against OSP, and then in his most recent fight, he came out pretty strong against Tybura, but after that first round, he faded pretty hard and got beat up pretty badly in the second and third round. However, that first round was probably the best I've ever seen Rothwell in quite a while. So I think if Rothwell is able to pace himself a little better, I think he could have a lot of success in this matchup. And taking a look at his opponent, Philipe Lins. So Lins was the PFL 2018 season tournament winner. I mentioned it before in a previous breakdown of this fight where, I was kind of questioning the mentality of Lins going into this matchup. The guys, he should be financially stable at this point, but, he's coming into the UFC. I don't know, if he's just looking to get a paycheck or if he's looking to maybe kind of secure his legacy a little bit. But, so far he's given a pretty poor account of himself. I mean, he's dropped a fight to Arlovsky and to Boser already. That said, though, those are two solid opponents, and, they match up with him pretty poorly because, Lins, he is primarily a counter boxer or counter puncher, in my opinion. He will throw the jab and kicks, but those are kind of just to stay busy. A lot of the time, he'll wait for opponents to come in and just catch him with a counter. And so, in his matchup against Arlovsky, where Arlovsky is also a bit of a counterpuncher, you have both guys just kind of staring at each other for most of that fight. And, I got to say that fight was really close. I don't think either guy really put a stamp on that fight. But, I guess Arlovsky kind of got it for being just the slightly more busy opponent and just being the fighter who is, pressuring a little more. So I guess that's what won him the fight. And then in his fight against, Boser, he was going up against someone who, is a bit quicker in there, got a bit more volume, and was able to really just beat him to the punch. So, Lins wasn't really able to get much of his, offense going at all in that fight. And honestly, getting knocked out by Boser isn't the best look either. I mean, Boser's historically been a decision guy, and him getting knocked out just not a very good look in my opinion. As far as this matchup goes, though, I am going to side with Rothwell here. I actually had a bet placed on him in their first outing, or in that the first time they got matched up. And the reason I did that was because I felt that if Rothwell went to his grappling, I think he could have a ton of success. I think that, with Lins, if you look at his competition and, the guys he's beaten, I think he tends to have the most success when he's not giving up too much of a size advantage. Like during his run in the PFL, he's fought in my opinion, pretty low-level opponents. And once he's got to the UFC, he's barely able to hang with, fringe top 15 guys. That said, though, I think this fight actually will be pretty competitive on the feet, especially at distance. I think that Lins will be a bit quicker in this matchup, and if Rothwell decides to just stand and trade with him, I think that it's not going to be good for him. I think Lins will likely be able to counter him as he's coming in. That said, though, Lins has just looked like an absolute shell of his former self, but. If Rothwell is getting a little sloppy with his entries, he definitely, can get touched up. But I think that if Rothwell just looks to blitz in, throw a few combinations, get close, and then look to tie up and clinch up with Lins, I think he'll have a lot of success. Rothwell's really good at just, putting his weight on his opponents, tiring them out, and just dirty boxing with them in the clinch. So I do favor Rothwell a bit more in that regard. But yeah, I got Rothwell here, and I'm not sure if I'm going to rebet this fight. I already have a number of bets on this card already. But yeah, I might put a little bit on Rothwell by decision here. But yeah, the pick here is Rothwell, and I might put a little bit on him. What may or may not be the main event, we have Marina Rodriguez versus Michelle Waterson, and the odds haven't come out for this fight yet. So I'm not even sure if it's going to happen, but it's been supposedly rumored for quite a while now, but the odds still haven't come out. So I'll kind of line it in a bit when after I do the breakdown here. So let's start with Waterson first. So obviously she gets memed pretty hard for throwing those axe kicks and missing by a good 3 or 4 feet, but somehow she still was able to land a couple of those on Hill. But yeah, her striking overall is not that good in my opinion. Her output isn't the highest, and she's mainly just throwing single shots out there. Will throw those kicks to maintain distance, but more often than not, she's kind of just kicking the air. And against a solid, defensive striker, I see her having a really hard time landing, really any effective shots. And as far as her grappling game goes, though, she's not a great wrestler or anything, but, I've seen her utilize trips pretty well to get fights to the ground. And, when she is on top, she's got decent top pressure, but she generally isn't too high output or anything when, she's on top. Honestly, I think she's just a pretty middling fighter, in my opinion. She doesn't have any glaring weaknesses defensively, but, offensively, she just doesn't really do much that stands out. Her opponent, Rodriguez, it's got pretty good boxing in my opinion, probably one of the better strikers in the division. She has quite a bit of pop in her shots, has a pretty solid kicking game as well, and pretty solid counter punching. She also has, some pretty solid combination punching and, does mix it up pretty well, is able to give her opponents a number of looks. On the feet, I do favor Rodriguez quite a bit more. However, her defensive grappling is a massive liability. Her takedown defense actually isn't bad. She's got a good sprawl and, she digs underhooks pretty well. But once you get her onto her back, though, she's just not very good there. She's complacent there. She's very happy with just sitting in her guard and, maybe working some elbows, but seems to have no urgency to get back to her feet. She's already lost a couple fights like this, or actually she's lost one and tied one doing this, and she was on her way to getting out grappled against Ribas also, but was able to find the knockout. But man, it's really frustrating to see her, touch up other fighters on the feet, but just let fights slip away because she's too complacent on the ground. But as far as the pick goes and how this matchup will play out, I'm going to side with Rodriguez. Again, I do believe she is the better striker. I think she'll be landing a bit more on Waterson. She'll probably be landing much harder on Waterson also. However, the defensive grappling, again, is just too big of a liability. I think that she will likely touch up Waterson on the feet. And, if I'm Waterson, I expect her to look for a takedown, look to get the fight to the ground. But I'm not sure that she will be able to do that for at least 3+ rounds. If she is able to somehow get on top of Rodriguez, I think that she could very well just win the round by laying on top of her. That said, though, I just don't think that Waterson really has the wrestling chops to, again, secure 3+ takedowns over the course of, 3 rounds. So if I had to line this fight, I'd probably put Rodriguez at around maybe -150, -160 or so, because, I do favor in the striking quite a bit more, but I just can't trust her to get off her back if she is taken down. And, if this is a 5-round fight, I do favor her to be able to keep the fight standing long enough to win maybe 3 out of those 5 rounds. So I guess maybe she could be a bit more of a favorite, but again, I just can't trust her takedown, or I just can't trust her defensive grappling. Like, Rodriguez could very well be winning the first minute and a half, 2 minutes of a round, but if Waterson is able to get a trip or is able to get a takedown on her, she very well could just end up losing the round because she'll be giving up 3+ minutes of control time. So yeah, there's going to be no way I'm going to be putting money on her, especially if she's going to have a minus next to her name. Since, yeah, like, it's going to be really frustrating watching her, potentially piece up Waterson for, a couple minutes and then just laying on her back for 3.5 minutes. So the pick here is Rodriguez, and I most likely will not be betting this fight. And that will put a wrap to this week's episode. Just got to sell out here a little bit and say, if you guys are enjoying the content, please like and subscribe. But yeah, I do appreciate all the support so far. It looks like the channel is starting to pick up a bit of traction here. And yeah, I got to work on my sign-offs a little bit more, but don't really have much else to say here. So see ya.